we have been following Yinka's colorful career for over 5 years, and I think what stuck out for our team was his bold use of color, his dedication to the community, but most importantly, like, his projects just made us all feel joyful. And so we worked with him over the last couple of years and built a beautiful, beautiful collection together that you can see up here. We took a risk. We're bringing color back into design, and we really think that you all agree, because as of the last 2 days, he's been awarded 2 HIP awards. 2 Best of NeoCon Gold. And he's taking home the Best of Competition with this wonderful design team here. So it's a complete honor, thank you. You can have a sneak peek up here in all these beautiful Stylex chairs. And then if you want to immerse yourself in joy, please come to our Momentum showroom at 323. So also, we are gathered here with 2 industry icons who I respect and we all respect so much. Khoi, who's the CEO of ASID. ASID is the presenting sponsor today, so thank you, ASID. And then the, and then the uncanny Cheryl Durst, EVP and CEO of IIDA. Without these organizations, we would not be here today. So thank you very much. And so please join me in welcoming Cheryl, Khoi, and Yinka.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a wonderful NeoCon so far. We've been having a blast, and it's been such a great experience so far. Before we get into our conversation, Cheryl told me not to pull out notes, but I'm going to pull out. I'm going to be really like.
I said you can pull out notes, just don't wiggle the paper.
I know. Why, Cheryl?
Like that.
I do want to express sincere appreciation for a few of our special guests today. Jennifer and Paul, thank you so much for having this vision and this courage to do such an incredible collaboration with Yinka. It's been so amazing to see it. Congratulations on all your accolades. By the way, I'm going to be selling my moat mini tote on eBay because apparently it's a hot commodity, so anyone wants a bid on that. I also want to thank the ASID and the IIDA. I know a lot of the special guests are here. A lot of them are on the national board, so thank you so much for coming and supporting us. And to thank the MART and the NeoCon team. You guys have been incredible. You guys have been so supportive, especially throughout the last few days. We've been doing various events throughout the NeoCon, and you guys have been just amazing, so thank you. And then, of course, thank you to the ASID team. You guys make everything work. You guys make me on time, and thank you so much, and our members appreciate that. And then, of course, thank you to Yinka and Cheryl for agreeing and being so open to having this conversation. I've been looking forward to this since Jennifer and I had breakfast together in New York months ago, and I'm just so glad that we're able to do this. So thank you so much for being here. Well, y'all, and by the way, excuse my language, I'm from Georgia. Before we dive into this conversation, I did want to say that during the last 13 plus years of friendship with Cheryl, I have always been at a sartorial disadvantage, right? She always shows up looking amazing, and I'm just kind of frumpy all the time standing next to her. But thanks to Yinka, I just want to model off my. I feel like I'm very on par today. So thank you so much for your.
I'm jealous. It's Tuesday. It's NeoCon Tuesday. I kind of want those shoes. I will trade with you.
Those are pretty good too. So thank you for that. You've made my dreams come true. I'm super excited about this opportunity to be in conversation with Cheryl and Yinka. Yinka's multidisciplinary studio creates work that invites the audience into a full world of hope, joy, and optimism. He empowers us to imagine environments through our own personal lenses by creating worlds immersed in a visual language that draws upon his own British-Nigerian heritage. Yinka has collaborated with a diverse group of global brands, including Adidas, Lego, Universal Music, Bombay Sapphire, and Courvoisier. His current collaboration with Momentum Textiles and Wallcovering and the Art on the Mart continues his vivid exploration in multiple scales, from print to furniture to interior design and to the urban landscape. So please help me give a warm welcome to Yinka Ilori. We're going to have a real, I hope, a casual but really great conversation about the work that Yinka's been doing. So I'm going to kick off with a question for you, Yinka. Design is, of course, it conveys a lot of emotions and motivation, and you're a multi-disciplinary artist and designer with clients that range from incredible public spaces to major fashion brands and music and lifestyle and more. So if you can, talk to us about the common thread that you weave through all the work that is so diverse.
Well, firstly, thank you for a wonderful introduction. It's a huge honor and pleasure to be here in Chicago at NeoCon. It's my first NeoCon. And my sort of first, I would say, US project that's been, well received. So I was super nervous to, launch this campaign with Momentum because I didn't know what the response would be like. I'm from London, that's home, so I know I've got my community there. So I was feeling very kind of nervous and vulnerable, but you've made me feel really welcome. So thank you for the great reception. But yeah, I've been working, in design and art and architecture for like sort of 15 years. My studio consists of, architects, product designers, illustrators, and we work across different projects from architecture to set design to fashion to film now, with Art on the Mart. And we just, we get different briefs, coming in probably like every week. We work on like 20 projects a year, maybe more sometimes. We decline projects now because we're trying to protect, the narrative and the brand and the way we tell our stories, because storytelling is so intrinsic to the work that I do, and they're also very personal to the work that I do as well. But the biggest thread for me is community. I always say I was raised by a community. My parents raised me, but I was raised by people who, who lived in my estate. I lived in a really big estate in London called Marcus Estate. And it was, a big estate with families, from Nigeria, Ghana, Turkey, Senegal. I had the whole country, in my estate. So it's, for me, essentially, I think my community raised me. We had a playground in our back garden, which was communal. And I saw the impact, play had, firsthand in my life and the life of people in the community. This idea of playing together, respecting cultures, people's identities, people's values. So that's been intrinsic to my, my practice is, how can I celebrate a community in spaces, and so they can feel seen, but also feel like they belong, to a space or a place.
That leads us into our next question rather perfectly, and also a clarification, because when you say estate in the UK as a place to live, that's very different than what estate means in the US.
Mansion, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah. So, it was an entire housing, it was a neighborhood. Yeah. It's I don't know. It's a borough. We call it a borough. So you have North London, South, and I lived in North London. Okay, perfect.
So, yeah.
I just wanted to set that stage a little bit. So when you talk about community, and that's obviously a conversation that's very prevalent in interior design, we talk about spaces that create community and create belonging and identity. Can you talk a little bit about, for the designers in the audience, how can we better create places where people feel community, where people feel included, where people feel as if they belong?
Yeah, it's a good question, yeah. We work on projects with, many developers, commissioners, in community estates and places, and we do a lot of work in public spaces. We work with galleries and museums who are trying to tap into new audiences that are young, diverse, because sometimes those institutions don't know how to do it. They are, showing the same shows, they have the same audiences, they have all the old masters in the gallery that I can't relate to, I can't connect with. So what we try and do is we try and host workshops with people who live in those communities. And how can we bring them into our process from the beginning, whether it's through model making or through, listening to their stories, and so we can weave in their narratives into the projects. And that always makes for a great project when they can see themselves in the project, in the sculpture, in the pavilion, in the textiles. So we just try and weave in these different types of themes in these spaces so they can feel like they feel part of this project. And that's always been my process when I work on a public project.
Yeah. If we can dive into that a little more about this idea of storytelling,
Yeah.
right, as your vehicle for doing this. Tell us about that process, and you know, 'cause the work is so diverse, right? And how do you tell stories with so many different types of media?
Yeah, you know, we designed a project last year called The Flamboyance of Flamingos, and it was an estate in Barking. The Barking estate was probably the biggest estate in Barking. I think it's been there for 100 years. And it was their anniversary of this estate in East London. So we were told to redesign the playground, which was, you know, a huge opportunity. And it was my second playground I designed in London. So we were talking to the locals who had been there for 90 years, 80 years. So then you've got this old generation and you've got the new generation who don't even know about the narratives of Barking.
Yeah.
But there was a history of flamingos that used to live in Barking, which sounds crazy, like having pink birds, flamingos, living in East London. But what happened was that people were clipping their wings and they had to remove them from Barking. So just understanding the narratives of flamingos living in Barking, we decided to bring back the flamingos through play, through these springers. Again, that opens dialogue for conversation about heritage and storytelling and old narratives that we can share with the new generation, but also kind of respecting the richness of culture and heritage in that part of East London. But then also kind of, you know, hosting workshops with old people, young people, and just trying to unravel and understand what East London meant to them. How can we respect the past and move into the future? So that's an example of this is the playground here actually. And then looking into old archive of play objects, like you can see on the left here, on the top left, that was one of the old playgrounds that we brought back in. So really kind of trying to dig deep and go back to the kind of archive material and bringing them back because they are part of the heritage of that space. I'm a big believer in trying to respect the past, but also bringing it into the future because it makes for a better conversation when you respect the past.
We talk a lot about, and we know that design is global. People in this room are designing projects all over the world, but we also know that human beings crave what is local. You used the word resonant just a bit ago, and hyper-locality, particularly in hospitality, has become increasingly important. How do we blend, there it is, local and global? Is it doable? Is it possible?
I think it's doable. I think I sort of blend the local and global through my use of colour and through my use of Nigerian folklore, which is words of wisdom. So I'm a big believer in affirmation and using words to amplify a space or tell a story. It's always a kind of starting point for me. So I find when I use Nigerian folklore and words of wisdom, it's a kind of global conversation because these folklores are humorous and funny and make you feel safe. But when you actually dig deep into it, there is a message behind these folklores, and these folklores talk about love and hope, identity, not being jealous of people, not being envious. And these folklores are woven into a lot of my Nigerian influences, like music, from Fela Kuti to King Sunny Ade. So I use music and colour and words of wisdom to create that kind of local and global conversation. And people connect with it,
And despite our ancestry, we all have common tales, common myths, common magic, common folklore, as you say, and so those stories blend, and so people can see their own heritage. I think it was like when that movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding came out. Like, that was a Greek family, but that could have been a black family, that could have been a Jewish family, that could have been an Italian family, that could have been anyone's family, and I love what you were talking about with your folklore because it resonates with you, but I think it speaks to all of us.
Yeah, I think folklore for me is something I've always, from a young kid, my parents have always kind of spoke to us in using folklore. They were very strict Nigerian parents. Church.
Are there any other kind?
No. They were, and very direct and very, this is what you need to do to kind of get to here. But folklore was something that we were always kind of presented with, and they kind of kept me on a straight and narrow. But then also, I remember the kids kind of dismissing those folklores and sort of not wanted to sort of listen to them. But somehow I found myself going back to it through music And now it's come back, in my work, and that, I started using it, when I was designing chairs. I was obsessed with chairs. I'm a chair collector. I've got over 100 chairs. And it started off by me, combining folklore and objects and telling stories of folklore in objects that tell stories.
Yeah, I don't think this crowd knows anything about collecting chairs.
No.
No, I think that's really interesting, and you talk about this inspiration, right? Can you talk a little bit about your process when you start to work on a project and how you weave all these diverse aspirations?
I think people who know my work now kind of see my work in the public space, and I'm sure for some people today, I think they're probably seeing my work for the first time at NeoCon and think, maybe textiles is the only thing that we do or I've done. But I think to kind of go back, sort of like over 10 years, my thirst love has always been chair design, chairs. I studied product design and furniture at university, and I did a project in university called Our Chair, which was inspired by an artist called Martino Gamper. And we had to go and find 2 old chairs and, tell a new story, but using every kind of component in those 2 chairs to make a new piece of art. But then I became obsessed with that project, and then find myself finishing uni and then designing chairs like every day, just finding chairs in London, going to charity stores, going to Skips and just collecting chairs and putting them in my small house, my parents' house in North London, which became a kind of, my room was so squashed with chairs. So my mum was just so annoyed with me with always bringing chairs home. And I just found myself, sort of like telling stories through these objects, because I was obsessed with these narratives and also how people were kind of interacting with these objects and these stories, but also sort of seeing themselves in these stories. And for me, I kind of see these chairs as like life teachers, which then led me into kind of, working on a global scale, because I got bored of chairs, for doing it for so long. And then I became known as the chairman. In London,
I like that.
and then I wanted to sort of do more outside of just chair design, and that's when I moved into kind of the public space, architecture, and product design, and we did some projects with like the Brit Awards in London. We did some stage design with S. Devlin, but I think for me, I try and not put myself into a box. I think I always reference an artist, a musician, who makes rap music. If they want to make, rock or pop, if they're inspired in that genre, then I think they can, because they feel something special about genre of music. And I'm a storyteller, I'm a dreamer, and I think the first thing I always put forward is I put those 2 things forward, and then work in the medium that I want to work in.
Yeah, I mean, I think chairs are probably the hardest thing to design too.
They are,
right? As accessible as they are, and as kind of common place as they are. And then for you to continue to scale up, I mean, that's a challenge.
It has been, yeah. I think it's always something I've wanted to have done. I think my sort of first commission was called the Colour Palace. Okay. You might probably see it here when it comes up on here. And it was to design a pavilion at the Dulwich Picture Gallery in London, in South London. And Dulwich is quite a middle class. It's quite very. Anyone here been there before? Dulwich, no? South London. Okay, someone back there. Yeah. So it's very fancy, and it's a very affluent area, but not close to it is a place called Peckham, which is a place in London, in South London. It's full of Nigerians. We call it a mini Lagos, which is the capital, used to be capital of Nigeria, and it's just full of Nigerians who have overtaken this part of London. But what's interesting is that we have Lagos, which is not far from Peckham, and they just don't mix those 2 kind of communities because they're sort of quite separated. But this pavilion was designed to really celebrate the kind of multicultural heritage of Nigeria. And the market there is called Balongo Market. So we created this pavilion which kind of mimics the energy and the movement of people who live in Nigeria, the colors, the sun, the language, the food, the smells, the ambience of that place. And we threw this pavilion into Dulwich. And those kind of projects for me, what I love is I love trying to open up a new dialogue, open up a new conversation. We had an MP actually email the gallery and said, they believe that this pavilion should be installed in a Lagos shanty town where it will feed its starving millions. And that was an MP in London who felt uncomfortable about this pavilion, this architecture that didn't feel he belonged in this gallery. So when I design spaces, I want to evoke an emotion. I want to I want to create products that are uncomfortable.
Right.
I want people to ask questions. I also want to invite new audiences into my space because, for me, when I remember as a young kid, I didn't feel I could go to these spaces.
Right.
And for me, the biggest thing for me is making design accessible and inclusive for every race, every genre, everyone. Because, it's a global language and we breathe design. Everything you use is designed.
Do you go back after a project's done and quietly observe how people are using it or going?
I do, yeah. I did that a month ago in the playground I designed in Barking. And I went down there and watched the kids use the swing, the merry-go-round, the slides. I mean, the playground was, I'm not going to swear, it was effed up. I mean, it was damaged. Because it's been used, a lot. There was graffiti. But I love that because then it becomes
They made it their own, right?
Their own, yeah. And I think whenever we design projects, there's always just worry about vandalism or youth vandalism. But I'm like, we can't let the kids interact with it the way they want. That's the whole idea of design, right? Is that they get to make their mark and, it belongs to them. Yeah. That's a constant battle with developers is how do we make it antisocial because, I don't know.
Ooh, battle with developers. That's a whole other session.
That's a whole other.
That's a Wednesday session.
Yeah.
You talked about how your work provokes thought, provokes energy, but your work also evokes joy.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about that, that very overt influence of joy in your work and in your life?
Sure, yeah. I think, I'm Nigerian, born in London. And I think the biggest takeaway for me and my parents is that they've always kind of encouraged us to see the best out of everything. Life, opportunities, experiences, always see the best out of it. So they were very optimistic people. It sometimes is difficult when you don't feel optimistic. You feel like you want to, break something. And they will just make you feel calm and see the positive in a situation. But I think their journey of moving from Nigeria to London as immigrants and trying to sort of create a new life in London, I think for me was super inspirational. Leaving your loved ones behind, moving to London, and trying to sort of build your own sort of new reality, a new family. I think is hard, and I think anyone, I'm sure maybe some of us have done it, but I couldn't do it. But I think for me, at home, we were always going to church. We'd always kind of have, around the table together. We'd always invite people around our house. We were that one family we let everyone come into our home. And sometimes it's a bit annoying, but my mum and dad is always cooking and inviting everyone around to our house. But I think I took that from them. And this kind of, this sort of power of being joyful and optimistic has definitely fed through into my work through my use of color and sort of seeing my parents go to church every Sunday, go to Nigerian parties or go to, they were always social. They're very outgoing, and they always have people around the house. But I think I took that from them and my grandmother, which has now kind of fed through into my work. So, I've been coined the architect of joy, and I've taken that title with great pride and joy because, I do believe I do bring joy to the world. And I think it's my calling because my parents, sort of gave that to me. So I want to share that with the world through the work I do in design and art.
Do you feel the joy when you're creating the work? Because it's not always easy.
Yeah.
And so how do you search for or find joy personally?
I think one of the things that I try and do is I try to look for interesting, unique stories in the work that I do. And I think I've been very blessed and very fortunate that whenever we get briefs coming to the studio, the brief is always centered around joy. How can you make joy live here? How can you bring joy to this space? We did an exhibition in London at the Design Museum. It was a sort of mini retrospective of my work. And just sort of seeing all the projects that I did, over a decade and the joy it brought to people was for me, quite emotional because I think we work on projects very quickly, right? And seeing that kind of archival work in one space was incredible, but also seeing how people interact with the projects was also quite special. But I think for me, we just try and look for kind of unique stories within those spaces and projects and trying to make joy and storytelling at the forefront of our design. I think, everyone's looking for joy. I think anyway, especially during the pandemic, we spent, 2 years at home, not traveling, not seeing family, and not being able to play. We've lost 2 years of making memories, and I love traveling. I get my ideas and inspiration from traveling and learning about culture and people, and I've learned a lot about being in Chicago that I'm sure will take away and might create a new project for me. But we lost 2 years of making memories. So I think for me, after COVID, there was an influx of commissioners who said to me, can you make us bring joy to this space? I mean, we've had interest from, lots of museums in the US who want us to do lots of work outdoors, in the public space. We've got 2 institutions we're talking to now, one in Atlanta and one in somewhere else. But the world wants joy to be present, and they want it to be experienced as a collective. Yeah.
That's a huge responsibility. Bring
Yeah.
me joy. That's
is.
huge.
Yeah. Chief Joy Officer.
Yeah,
Tough-
yeah,
That's a tough
seriously,
role.
the CJO.
Yeah, yeah.
No, it is. Yeah, it is definitely a huge responsibility. But I think it brings me joy.
Yeah.
Knowing that I can give joy back to someone else.
Yeah.
Because not everyone knows how to kind of create joy. I think as adults we sometimes forget that we need joy.
Yeah.
When kids play, their mission is, I'm going to make joy today.
Yeah.
Okay, how I'm going to make joy, but I'm going to draw on the wall. I'm going to draw my parents, because that's their mission. They just play, I don't know, just play with great freedom. But adults sometimes lose that kind of will to play and dream and be creative. And it's my responsibility to kind of remind us that we still deserve joy.
Yeah.
Even if it's, in textiles.
Yeah.
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 I love that. Oh, and you're so lucky. Koi and joy rhyme.
That's going to be a T-shirt.
You think about work, we think about making money and making friends and making more time, and how many times have we not said, I'm going to make joy today,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
the end game is joy and not something else that we're constantly in pursuit of.
Well, the fact that you're kind of allowing us to play, right?
Yeah.
We don't get to play it at all anymore. And I mean, I love these pictures of the kids playing and just the, I mean, for us too, while we were working on kind of prepping to talk with you, I mean, every time like Lindsay and I are always kind of batting back and forth in ideas, and it was always kind of with this big smile on our face, like, oh, let's talk about this, and even, so it's a pretty amazing. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So do you identify more as a designer, as an artist? How do you mediate between the two? Are there distinctions? And obviously there's similarities, but.
I don't know. I think obviously my background is is design, but I always feel like the art world is very snobby of the word design or designer. I don't know if you ever feel that sometimes they sort of try to push you away. And you're not one of us. But I think for me, I think people will call me an artist, a designer. I don't really kind of care about the label or the title. I think my mission is I'm a creator. I'm here to kind of tell stories, and if it does go into a gallery or it does go to the Royal Academy, then it's fine. If it does go into the Design Museum, then it's fine. But I think they're all kind of interlinked, aren't they? Design, art, architecture.
I think so.
I think it's from the same family. So I try and avoid sort of trying to separate those two worlds. But people sometimes call me a designer, and that's fine, or an artist, and that's fine.
You're good with that?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
That is that hard, and I think particularly in the US, for all kinds of reasons, we get hung up on the labels of only you can do this and touch that. Yeah. And only someone who calls themselves an interior designer can do this or touch that. Yeah. And it sometimes could be a limit to creativity. Lord knows it's a limit to joy. And that what I so appreciate about your approach and your work is the unrestrainedness, the lack of boundaries, not as a negative, but a positive.
Yeah, I think, I love, we just designed a pavilion in Berlin. It's my third pavilion. But I'm not an architect. I'm not going to claim I've done 7 years of architecture. Respect to architects who have spent 7 years, because that's tough, right? And but I think it's about sort of having the right team who can support you and actually bring those ideas to life. I've got a great team who's been working with me for nearly sort of 15 years now. But we sometimes I think commissioners can see something in you. I didn't think I could maybe even design a pavilion, but the work that I've done in public spaces then said to someone, "Oh, we think you could design a pavilion. Here's a commission." And that's kind of how it started. Same as a playground, same as designing a watch, same as designing, a collection, in September for a fashion brand. It's just people can see these ideas within me, and then they kind of give me these proposals. Even just from designing, a trophy for the Brit Awards in London. It's just those kind of projects that really do push me and think out of the box. How can I tell a story in this space or this medium? But yeah, we work on, even working on the mart, and doing this film for, called Umyukun, only happened because, we had an installation in London which was going to cost £1 million to realise. I don't have £1 million, neither does the commissioner. So we thought, how about we turn this exhibition into a film? And that's how it happened, was because we had this restriction. And then I thought, if I'm going to, do a film in Chicago, then it's got to be a film that's meaningful, that's going to really touch on themes that I'm experiencing and really care about right now. And how can it impact your life for 15 minutes and bring you some type of peace or joy or something you can take away and share with someone else,
Is there something that you haven't designed yet that you want to design?
That's a good question. I was talking to Samantha. A chair. I want to work with a chair. A chair.
Chair number 364.
Chair. So any chair brands out there who want to do collaboration.
There you go. Yeah.
But yeah, I've designed other chairs, but actually doing, a chair would be like an office chair, because I'm always in my office,
Oh, Lord,
Yeah,
you're in the right place to say that.
Yeah, office chair. That's
chair.
great. That's great. Yinka, this year is IIDA's 30th, right? And next year,
Amazing.
yeah. And next year is ASID's 50th. And
Wow.
so
Wow.
I'm sure. And of course, during this process, we both think about what the organizations have accomplished in the past, but then obviously the other part is what's going to happen in the future. What are you predicting in the future?
Oh gosh, I feel like I'm like Mystic Meg here, I think there would be, a big, need for more kind of open spaces, free, open community spaces. What I'm seeing is there's an influx of new designers and artists, and architects, interior designers coming through. I think even just being here this week, seeing all the young students and looking around and feeling inspired, and that's their energy inspired me to, I don't know, want to do more. And I remember being that young and going to my first trade show in London. It was incredible. But I think it's a need for spaces that are accessible, but also spaces that can bring joy and sort of bring people together. That's what I think is the future of design. And I'm seeing things of it now, but I think more than ever, even just looking at Milan Design Week, the use of colour was probably the biggest year I'd seen. So much colour in Milan, and all the brands coming down and everyone feeling part of something. So I think, spaces are free, accessible, but also kind of also pushing this theme of community is what I think is the next phase.
Yeah. That's great.
How about an advice question, Khoi?
Sure.
There are a lot of people in this room. They're architects, they're interior designers, they're in sales, they're in product manufacturing. There are students. What advice would you give both to people who are new to design and who've been practicing for a while?
Wow, yeah, it's good. So those, I think, for me, I'm a big, I love collaborating with people. I'm a huge collaborator. And I think sometimes as designers, we're sort of stuck in our ways and we just sit in our studios and we just do our own thing. And we think it's the best thing ever, which I always do in my studio. But I think sometimes kind of opening your eyes and ears to collaboration, working with other people, will give you a new perspective on what, what good design is, or, what themes you should be looking at, what ways you should be working. So that would be my advice to experienced designers, is open your studio to collaborations and meet new people, and just maybe thinking differently. I think for that, for new people, new students, I think it would be to sort of trust the process. I think one of the things I learned as well, and I remember actually I was working in Marks & Spencer's, working on the till, and as a young artist, I was desperate for my first solo show. I just finished uni, I was like, I want a solo show, I want an exhibition, and that's the next thing. And I met Tracy Emin. I don't know if you know Tracy Emin. Anyone knows Tracy Emin? The artist, yeah. And I served her. I was served her in the women's wear section, and she bought some bits and bobs. I packed her bag. And then I said, Tracy, I'd love to have a show. And she said to me, be patient. You know, I had my first year in 10, 15 years, and it took me time. So I think just maybe just being patient, trust the process.
Yeah.
You know, trust your craft, develop your craft, because you know this is it's a long game. You know, I'm only 37, and I've got a long way to go. Because you know I really want to keep telling stories and connecting with people, but also I want to, you know, I still want to be. I want to be as I want to be in my 90s and still designing and still traveling. You know, so take your time. Don't rush the process. Yeah.
And build that community of people that build you up, and you build them up.
Because with the work I do now, I think people, they know what to expect when I create a project. They know it's going to be talking about things of, I don't know, community or sexuality or racism, or there's always a theme I'm sort of touching on. I mean, with the projects in Berlin, we're talking about themes of racism within football, but looking at it through architecture. Yeah. You know, it's called Ballet of the Masses. So it's just trying to, you know, really finding ways of telling stories within different mediums.
That's amazing. Should we let the crowd into the conversation?
I think so. I mean, we've selfishly asked the questions to Yinka, and just on behalf of both of us and our organizations and the industry at large, thank you for the joy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. All right. So we'd love to take some questions from the audience. So please just raise your hand, and I think we have some runners with mics that will come to you. There's one right there. Yeah. Thanks for being the first to ask questions. I know that's a scary position to be in.
Okay. Yeah, I ain't scared.
There you go. There you go.
Shout out, you know, Jamaicans in the house. Really love your work. My name is Christopher. I have an organization called Design in Color out of LA. Design justice, brace practice. We diversify the way architecture is taught and practiced to unearth how people are silenced in the race and design processes. So I really love and appreciate your work. You talk a lot about joy, and we talk a lot about justice. How do you bring the two together?
Nice.
Liberation is a word that comes out in a lot of our work. I'm curious for you, how do you pull that all together? And before I leave, I want to make sure I get your card because I want to work with you.
No, it's a great question. Yeah, I think I sort of look at COVID. You know, when I looked at actually when George Floyd passing a situation. That was, you know, a huge eye-opener for me. Also, I think a huge eye-opener for the sort of British design industry. Yeah. And I think it was the first time for me where I became vocal on social media with what I'd experienced within the industry, because, you know, there's always this idea of maybe sometimes saying too much, or if you say something you might get blackballed or whatever that is. And I think I wrote this post on Instagram. You probably can still see it on my page, and just sort of let it go. I sort of had an outpour of people who were going through things that were similar, which was, you know, tough to read and tough to see. But I think what we're seeing now in London, there is a big design community now, really kind of coming together and talking about things that are really uncomfortable, and we're having these conversations. So I think it's, you know, it's something that's, I think is still ongoing. I think there's a lot of work to be done with, you know, with what you're talking about. But I think it also comes down to the people who are the shifters, the movers, those commissioners, those institutions who have the power to make those changes and have those conversations. But I think it's a collaboration between two people. But yeah, I think it's something that we're still developing, still working on. But I think from where it's coming now, there has been some change, but we have a long way to go, I think, for sure.
Okay. I think there's a question in the back.
Hi, thanks. My name is Sana, and I'm a textile designer, and so I'm really interested in hearing more about your textile designs, both with Momentum, but also projects you might have done in the past, and the importance of pattern and repetition in your work in general. Thank you.
Thank you. So we started speaking for nearly, I think, over just 2 years now. Yeah, we met over Zoom a few times, Jennifer and the team, and we were, you know, the brief was, there was no brief actually. The brief was, we love what you do, and can you create a collection that brings, you know, joy? And that was great because usually with our briefs, we get given the brief beforehand and we have to kind of try and stick to it. Yeah. So it was very special to kind of have a brief where there were no restrictions and it was kind of down to me. But yeah, the collection was all inspired by, affirmation. I'd experienced a dream catcher, when I was young. And I remember that moment of experiencing that dream catcher and what it meant for me. So we spent nearly sort of 2 years designing this, together with Momentum. They came to see me in London in my studio a few times. I went to Pennsylvania to go and see their mill and see their process. One of the toughest things for me was trying to get the right kind of color saturation because my work is so vibrant and rich in terms of the pinks I use are very kind of voluminous and the yellows are quite rich. So that was kind of one of the challenges of the project was trying to get the right tones in the textile collection. But I think one of the things that I did also find interesting was actually having a range of colors. We had, this kind of off-whites, but I don't really use or wear white. I like to wear a lot of color. But my house is white because that's the place where I try and relax, but using pops of color within the interior spaces. But yeah, it's been a sort of 2-year project, and we sort of launched it this week at NeoCon. And yeah, it's been a great project with with a great response, and it's my first textile collaboration. But prior to that, I've always been around textiles. I'm Nigerian, so we wear lots of Swiss laces and Dutch wax prints. So I've always been around pattern, materials and color. So for me, this was an easy project to work on because I knew what I wanted to do. I had a clear idea of what this would look like. And we spent time back and forth sketching, developing the collection. And yeah, that was our process. Thank you.
Other questions?
As a designer, sometimes we strive for perfection, but we also know that perfection is often a thief of joy. So how do you define when you stop?
Oh, wow.
When do you stop? Wow.
Wow, that's a good question.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think I learned really early in my career that there is no such thing as kind of like perfection or finding that kind of perfect design, right? And I always still find myself when I finish something still designing. When you look at the installation, you look at the project. But I think the power is actually in sort of letting go, right? And just kind of letting something kind of go into the world and, letting that imperfection that you've seen, be imperfect because other people will find beauty in your imperfection. And that's what I found. I found that people, we're not looking for the imperfection, looking for the joy or the memories that they're going to make from it. So I've kind of stopped looking for imperfection, but I just, I let the world, enjoy what I think may be imperfect. We worked on this pavilion in Berlin, and I found so many things that were imperfect about it, but seeing the interaction made me forget about what was imperfect. So I don't know. I'm probably my biggest critic and, biggest kind of, to myself, but I don't know, I always try and let those imperfections find beauty within itself.
That's great. There's a question up here, yeah?
When you come up with your sayings, like on this one, you are my world, do you come up with those? And also, what role does faith play? Because a lot of people don't talk about faith, in business or whatever, especially here in the States.
In case people didn't hear it, the question is about where does Yinka come up with these phrases? Is that right?
It's a great question. Yeah.
Faith, right? Yeah.
That's a good question. So, my parents again, they speak in like riddles and they sort of, a lot and use lots of words of affirmation at home. And I used to write poetry. I loved poetry. And I love playing with words. And one of my favorite books and artists was Tupac. He wrote this poem that said, the rose that grew from the concrete. And I remember being, a young kid, just loving poetry, loving the anthropology, and I wanted to actually study English as a bachelor, but I didn't study it. I don't know why. But I found myself writing poetry now within my work. So these words just they just come to me because I just love to write, and I have a book where I just have affirmations in the book. We're actually doing a book with Tate in London, which is called A Book of Affirmations, which is just affirmations and illustrations for kids in schools. So they just come to me and just come when I think of it, I write it down and I use it in my work as an extension of my illustration. Yeah.
Is that the start of the process for you, or?
Sometimes it is, yeah. I kind of, again, like during the pandemic, we had a quote that said, "If you can dream, then anything is possible." And that came out because, I had my studio, and I remember we lost loads of projects during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I had to let some people go, on furlough, and companies were going bust and being liquidized, and we were just kind of clinging on. And I was given this opportunity to kind of design murals around London, and affirmation was the third thing I did. So we had these billboards used for advertising, but I decided to use these billboards as a form of affirmation to empower people who were feeling lost and confused and lonely during COVID, because we all felt those feelings. I don't know about you, but I felt anxious and unsure about my future. But these affirmations on these billboards really did change people's lives, and it became a global campaign that people, use today when they're feeling low or feeling kind of confused. Yeah. So I think I found that during the pandemic, I found the importance of my work, and I knew my calling was community and bringing joy, because it was people needed it during the pandemic. Yeah.
There are people who love words and people who love visuals.
Yeah.
I love that you love both
Yes.
together.
Yeah.
I might really love you.
Just saying.
Say it on stage.
Just saying. That's great. There's a question.
Yeah, don't tell Troy.
Hello, my name is Imani Alethea. I am an interior designer, but I've just broken into furniture design as well. But I think my question for you is, you speak about dual heritage and, having that Nigerian background, but growing up in London. So I'm Jamaican Trini, and I grew up in America. So I'm currently seeing it a lot more in my design now, is bringing in the flavor of my people without being in too much of said flavor. How do you balance that, or do you not balance that, or do you throw it all in, and does the British, the London filter come in later? What's that process like with your dual mindset? Because it's not only just the heritage, but then it's also design, your different design fields as well. You've got the graphics, then you've got the furniture. So there's a lot of duals happening. How do you balance that?
It's a good question, yeah. I think I always try to, I think everything I do, there is a kind of hint of my heritage in there, and that's biggest is the use of color. And I think I try and I don't know, you can't get away from my use of color. I'm kind of forcing you to kind of engage, with my language of design, and that's, through the use of color and words and textiles. So I think for me, I don't kind of seek your permission. I haven't really sought permission for 15 years, in my career, and I don't need your validation to tell me that, this is the way that you should tell a story, or this is how you fuse British and Nigerian, because I wasn't raised to seek permission.
Right.
I was, raised to kind of do and, tell it, in your own way. So I think with the work that I do, I'm not afraid to bring in my heritage and my culture, because if you want me, you are going to get the Nigerian and you are going to get the British, because that's who I am.
Yeah.
So within the work that I do, whether it's architecture or a product, or if we're designing a watch, you are going to find affirmation on the watch. You are going to find textiles on it. You're going to find all these kind of things that I care about in this product. And I think sometimes we've had one client say to us, "Oh, it's too colorful," and I was like, "Really? This is what I."
Who did they think they were hiring?
Yeah. So when we have those kind of pushbacks, then we sort of step away, because I think for me it's about trying to not dilute, my design process, and I think that's why with Momentum, I think that's why it was successful, because there was no moment along the way where Jennifer or the team was saying, "Well, that's a bit too colorful," or they were giving me options. It was more like, these are the possibilities.
Yeah.
And I like to know that there are possibilities and ways of doing things. So yeah.
That's great. That's great. There's one here. There's one over here.
Yeah, hi. I'm curious about your approach of risk. I'm over here. You seem to not be afraid to try new things and explore your creativity, and that might not be very comfortable. And so I'm curious to learn more about how you approach risky endeavors and why you put yourself out there.
It's a great question, yeah. I think a prime example would be to talk about the film for Art on the Mark. You know, I'm not a film director. I don't make films, you know. I've got ideas, for films and ideas for projects. But I think it's about trying to work with, the right expertise who are, masters in their field. So we worked with, a great animator and a great, sound artist, a great sound designer who was able to really sort of tap into this idea that I had for this film, the right sounds, the right emotions, the right characters, the right scenes within the film, the right, trying to take us through this process of what we think this film should look like. But we just work with great people, and I think that's a risk in itself. I think I was there with the risk in doing this film because it's the first time I've actually worked on such a large scale. And for other film critics, I might probably get slaughtered and they might say that was awful. But I, had the best team around me, and I believe that was the best film I could have done because I had the right people to really kind of push this thematic film and tell it the most kind of purest and honest way. So I think it's just trying to be open to not thinking you can do it all yourself, because I think we're sometimes, not open to kind of collaborating and thinking we know we can do it alone. And I'm not a one-man army. I think I kind of lay down most of my work is kind of down to my team. Yeah. I only do a tiny fraction of it, and I think I spend my time on my mobile doing these awful sketches and these things, and my team can sometimes, they understand it and they bring it to life, So I think it's just about, having the right team around you.
And the trust, right, that you can build.
The trust that, who you're working with, they can actually, because my team now, I could draw a triangle and tell you that it's a pavilion, and they would draw it for me. Or I can tell them that it's supposed to be, a chair in the sky, and they would make it happen. So having the right team who actually understands your ideas, your design process, who actually kind of run your brain and just can get it straight away, I think it's super intrinsic to any kind of design process or project we take on.
That's great. I think we have time for one more question, and I believe it's over here, right?
Hi, my name is Tay. I have a question for Cheryl, actually.
Fantastic.
And
take a break.
Yinka, too. But how do you define good design?
Ooh. Oh, look, as we look at each other.
You want my notes or?
Good design doesn't just look good. It feels good. It means something. It says something. It's allowed to break the rules. Yeah. But I think most importantly, here's our best example. Good design brings joy.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer.
You like that?
You like that? You go with that?
I'm not add to that at all, no.
Yeah.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Right. All right. I think, I think that's a great way.
Can I ask one last question?
Of course.
So this chair tattoo that you have, so you all can't see us, and I happen to be leaning over, is that a special chair in your life? Does that chair have meaning?
It does, yeah. It's good. It's a chair that has been acquired by a museum in London called Brighton Museum. It was one of my first chair acquisitions when I was designing chairs in London. It's called a captain's chair, and I remember in 2015 I was going to stop designing because I was frustrated with the lack of awareness about my narrative. I think also people were confused about what I was trying to say and what I was trying to do. So I think I nearly kind of stopped designing in 2015. I was going to pack it up and go into marketing. I don't know why I was going to go into marketing, but that was what I was going to do. And then this collection changed my life. It was called If Chairs Could Talk. It was 5 chairs that I designed. It was based on 5 characters who I knew as friends in my school. And each chair is based on someone I know. They've seen the chair. They don't know it's about them. And it's just, this chair is very special because it was my first acquisition in London. So it's the project that kind of saved my career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's all go find a captain's chair.
Yeah, I know. That's right. That's right. Yinka, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.